You are listening to the Level Up Gaming Podcast, episode 140, Avoiding Accounting and Math. In today's episode, we discuss avoiding accounting and math. We discuss how the numbers can get in the way of the fun of a game. We also dive into different places where it makes sense to avoid numbers to increase a game's fun. If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome into the Level Up Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and joining me virtually once again, I've got Josh. Josh, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing great. I actually got to see you in person like just a couple days ago. It was great.
That's true. We got to share a meal and something that resembles a dessert.
Yeah. Oh, that was a terrible choice. Again, it tasted delicious. It just was completely the wrong textures. If you're wondering, it was a salted caramel tart that just, if you had overcome.
It wasn't caramel.
It wasn't caramel. It was a Werther's original. By the time we got a chance to have it, it's just the recipe unfortunately didn't have the right instructions on it, and so the moisture content.
To be fair, it's my 10-year-old son was the one that was putting stuff together, so the flavors were absolutely on point, and the only real problem was that instead of being a caramel, it cooked a little bit too long and became sort of a hard candy center. And honestly, a Werther's covered in chocolate and coated in graham crackers.
Yeah, it's like a salted caramel candy.
It sounds delicious. Pretty good. Yeah. It's just not in that format. We're going to try it again. I've got a candy thermometer, and we're going to make it. And I think it's a great idea, and I love the fact that he wants to cook. Because as you know, I'm the one that cooks in the household, and I like to see other people
trying to take up
getting involved in that. Yes. Any chance that I'm not cooking is like that's heaven for me right there. That's a good time.
Well, cooking does involve a lot of numbers and a lot of measurements
math involved.
Yeah, there's a lot of math involved. And you know what really bogs down a game? Math.
Yeah.
Accounting, math. Those types of things tend to bog down a game, and I think long ago, I was probably in a you probably shouldn't do this episode, where one of the 10 things was going heavy into like the math and the accounting stuff, and so like what is it really used for? And Josh was so nice to give us a little outline here. The one thing I didn't even think about was the first one on here. I was actually connected with the second one, which was resources. When I thought about this topic, I completely thought about resources. But the first one makes a lot of sense, so I'll let you go ahead.
Okay. So math, when we're talking about math in video games, really we're talking about the 2 R's. We're talking about rolling, we're talking about resources. When you talk about rolling, you're talking about the numbers that come from your character sheet and from your dice. You've got your skills, you got your attacks, you got your damage rolls, you got your HP, numbers. It's just pure numbers up and down. And that's all super useful for sort of putting some context behind what's going on in a game. You've got a guy running out with a submachine gun, blasting into a horde of zombies. Just, putting it out there, how much damage does that do? What is it? What happens when you shoot, a giant dragon with a rocket launcher? You need some sort of context. And sometimes if you're going to make a long dragged out fight, you need to have numbers there. The other R is your resources. And that goes into like your ammo. If you've got arrows or you got bullets or you got rockets, you got a big stack of pies that you're going to throw at clowns. Whatever it is, having those things and keeping track of them, it's numbers. It's also money. It's also items. If you're out there picking up rat pelts to clean up the trams or whatever it is that they've got you doing in WoW or something, you've got to have these resources tracked, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
so I think what you were talking about when you brought this topic up, avoiding accounting and math, you said you were looking more at the resources. A lot of those resources, ammo specifically, is a one that's very frequently, I feel, dropped in a game. You're playing, you're just like, yeah, you've got whatever number of arrows. We're not going to keep track of them because that's just a pain in the butt. Or you just reload. Reloading takes an action or a turn or whatnot, and so we're not going to count how many bullets you have because either you're running around with like 700 pounds worth of ammo, or we're never going to get through this dungeon.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you have a bunch of arrows, or you're trying to count the number of crystals or catalysts for your spells, or in a modern game, ammo is a good example of that. Again, it sort of depends on your it sort of depends on your world, the tone you're going for. A good example of that would be like if you're doing like a very heavy survival based game, then resources make sense because every bullet matters, every potion matters, every little bit of thing that you have to be able to barter with matters. But in most like D&D games, gold quickly becomes useless. Um, I mean, like within like a few dungeons, gold becomes useless. Um, Ammo, again, do you need your ranger to specify how many arrows he has in his quiver? I guess if you really want to be picky against that person. In a modern game, you know, I tend to leave the accounting piece of it to like for ammo on the player. Okay. And I guess the player is going to determine I've run out of bullets, or I've done this, or I've emptied the clip, whatever it might be. But you can't shoot forever. This isn't some movie where they don't know how many bullets go in a gun, and you have a pistol that shoots like 700 times. Um, but and money as well. At least in current modern games that I've played in, we basically just, as long as you're not buying like private jets, money is effectively, we don't even account for it anymore. We know how much your character can basically spend in general, where you're not doing anything lavish and outside the purview of the character, so it's not breaking with the reality. I feel like that's pretty much where the resource counting piece, if you want to kick it to the curb, just don't break with the reality. Your character cannot buy a castle, because he does not possess enough wealth to do so. But your character has dived into a couple dungeons and he needs a new broadsword. He can get a new broadsword.
Well, and you could do a little bit of fun with this also. When you are playing a modern game or a fantasy game or a sci-fi game, whatever it is, part of a character's backstory is, who are they? Where do they come from? What is their sort of lifestyle? And you can use that sort of as a basis for what sort of resources they have access to without having to go into a whole bunch of numbers. Somebody who's, your average scrappy adventurer may not have a whole ton of money at their disposal to pay for, I don't know, a lavish trip or, you know, uh, some sort of something fancy. You could go so far as to say, okay, you could scrape up enough resources for this. This is above your pay grade, but what's going to happen is maybe you won't get as many. You won't be able to eat as nice of meals from here on out. So you may only get like you'll take a penalty on your next couple of days worth of healing rolls, or when you take rests or whatnot. Or maybe you might even suffer a point of exhaustion if that's the kind of game you're playing, because you don't have the resources to keep yourself fit after you've done this thing. Players can take a look at that and say, okay, well, this is worth it, because then I've got this thing or I've done this thing. And that makes it player's choice. It brings it back into their sort of ability to make decisions and see what's going on. And yeah, I absolutely agree with letting your players keep track of things like ammo. Another thing that I completely forgot about when we were talking about this was weight. Weight of your
Weight
gear.
is horrible. Nobody goes into encumbered weight. Somebody probably does, but you're not carrying around, bricks of lead with you because.
Well, and once again, if that's the game you're playing, by all means.
Again, a survival game is really where I see it. Something where resources are scarce, like a Forgotten Worlds. I think that's it. Forgotten Realms. That's the one. That's a hex crawl where I believe the entire point is that, like every piece of the hex crawl is like a survival experience.
Yeah. Well, and if you're playing like a horror game, like a Call of Cthulhu, or if you're doing some sort of dungeon crawl where it's going to be resource intensive, and that's part of the game. That is part and parcel to the style of game, the story that you're telling. Great. Focus then on those resources because that is a part of the story. This is not just, periphery. This is not just numbers in a character sheet. This is how that story is supposed to be told. But I see no reason to focus on these. I think ignoring those numbers are a really good idea when it's not integral to the story. When you can, if you could ignore the story, if you could ignore the numbers, it's better for the story that way. Like, we go back to the skill checks. Okay, it was rolling dice. We're going to ignore resources for a second. I want to talk about the other half and why you should ignore. Sometimes rolling should be ignored. If a character approaches a situation in a way that makes sense from a storytelling standpoint, that's how they're going to win. That's how they need. Doing it this way is a great idea. You don't have to make them roll for it. We've talked about it before when we talked about puzzles, when we talked about when we come to a situation where we don't want the players that possibility of failure because we think that they've made a great choice. They've role played into a good situation, or they've just come up with a beautiful solution to a problem. Don't give them the chance to fail. Give it to them.
I usually say yes with that. There is a caveat that was pointed out in one of our emails from a listener on the puzzle side of things, and also this would factor into the social side of things. If Ugg the Barbarian, who has -12 intelligence, okay, but is played by your super smart friend Steve, okay, who can figure out every puzzle that you put in front of him. He's a wizard when it comes to enigmas. Okay, you can't just let Steve solve the enigma and be like, Ugg is a genius. No, Ugg doesn't understand, so you might have to make him roll and fail, even if he has the right answer.
Yeah. Well, Steve's a little metagaming at that point, and that also comes back to knowing your players. I mean, if you see Steve come up to the table with, just dumps all of his stats except for the stuff he needs to beat stuff up, but he's, rocking that big old brain. Yeah, you need to know your players. You need to sort of rein that in. But if you got a character that's, got high charisma and they come into a situation and the player themselves also like plays into that and gives that good speech.
If the skills match and the player's tongue matches, then yes, the player should be given a lot of leeway. Just say yes. Okay, we've talked about it before. But if the player does not match the skills, I mean, it works both ways. If the player's below the skill, meaning that they can't come up with what to talk about, then, the skill is there to assist them. The role is there to assist them. The other way is the role is there to be a detriment to you. You must make a roll.
Mhm.
Like, I do not care what you say because that's what you want to say. What you say is me kill you now.
Now, and that also works for attack rolls too. Like I'm not saying in combat, I can say in combat, but like for the general, like if you're having a social situation and somebody upsets Thug the Barbarian, and Thug goes and hauls off and hits the person, okay, hold on a second. Is that within the character? Is this person, flat footed? You you don't have to roll for that. You don't have to have a whole like let that happen and start it from there.
Or
Um,
basically let everything but a one hit. I mean,
yeah.
like,
What I've done for situations like this, when you've got the character that has sort of uh, that's going for the thing that they're good at, instead of making them roll, if you still want to keep a little math involved and see, where it's going to be, take a look at what their average roll would be. Like if you're doing a D20 system, you can take a look at their skill, plus 10. And if that's, pretty high, you can just, passively accept some of these things.
yeah, you could just assume that all skills are passive and just take 10.
Yeah.
Take 10 plus whatever your modifier is, and ta-da, you hit the guy.
Obviously, you don't do this in a tense situation because once you add stakes to a situation, uh, let me go back and say you can use the fact that it's a tense situation to force a roll where you may not have done a roll before. Like, okay, yeah, you're a silvery tongued charisma, out the wazoo normally, but right now, guards have swords drawn. The queen is holding a AR-15 at your head. It's a weird situation. Aliens have come down from above. The
Yeah,
demons are coming up from below.
that is the just say yes mentality, which is if there are stakes involved, if there's something to be lost or gained, that's when you start to incorporate the role. So I
Mhm.
mean, for the most part, you can ignore most roles as long as there aren't heavy stakes involved. And player action. I mean, again, there probably are stakes involved for hitting some guy in the room, but at the same time, you know that guy's not expecting it, and you that is sort of like a consequence to the action. You shouldn't be hitting the guy, so I'm just going to give it to you, and it's sort of like a bad. I give it to you, and consequences roll out of it.
Now, there are some times when you absolutely should keep the numbers in. Like I said, if the stakes are up, if the fight matters, if you're in a fight situation, combat, I think for the most part, like 99% of the time, you're going to want to keep those numbers in. It's those specialty circumstances where it's not as important. If you have your players going up against like a horde, you can sort of just do like simple rolls instead of doing damage rolls. See like how many of them you kill, how well are you doing, how much, you know, um, it's more, it's less about the exact hits and exact damage and more about how well are you faring against a horde. Uh, the math can be sort of toned down. But if you're in a knockdown, drag out fight with, the big bad or the big bad's minions or the big bad's minions' best friends, then by all means, make those rolls. That's what you're there for. You're there to, play the game. Um, and as far as resources go, we talked about this before. If you're in a game where the resources matter, if weight or ammo or potions or number of crystals that you've collected, yeah, track those. But
Yeah, I mean, again,
also,
it goes back to what you said. If it matters for the story, you should keep in the role. I mean, if it doesn't matter for the story, I mean, even if it doesn't matter for the scene, you don't necessarily need to keep in the role. Even if, like, you know, maybe this money, situation for this scene, it doesn't matter. Okay, somebody's going to reimburse you, so you are allowed to play, flagrantly with the money, or you're allowed to be a little rambunctious. I mean, like you see this a lot in like video games where like you'll have something that can't be purchased or unattainable effectively, and like they'll give it to you because there's something related to the story in it. So it makes sense. You can even ignore certain things in certain situations.
Yeah. And we talked about with money does become, especially in like fantasy games, if you do dungeon crawls and stuff like that, cash becomes kind of worthless.
It starts to lose its value. Every time I've
It
played
does.
in D&D, it takes like 3 dungeons and suddenly you're sitting on like 12 million gold. Okay, you've got gold tapestries, you've got, I mean, like, and again, that's sort of how the reward system works. And okay, if you want to be like, well, this is what you can do with that gold. You can upsell it into magic items, and it costs you this much for this much, and this much for this much. Okay, like you could do that, and it's a good way to decrease the amount of gold people have. But at some point, it's sort of, if you don't have a good solution for what you could eventually spend that on, it's effectively a worthless resource very quick.
Yeah. So the only time that you really want to keep the gold sort of money involved in the situation is when the players are actually working towards a goal. If they have a goal in mind and you say, they come to you and they say, we want to do this thing. Like, we want to have our own keep. Uh, that sounds like a great idea. Okay. Here's how much the building would cost. Here's how much, setting things up would cost. Here's this, here's that. You're going to have to, and don't make it just a monetary thing. You're going to go have to find people. You're going to have to find somebody to work your kitchen. You're going to have to find people to do your stonemasonry and your, lead your roofs and dig your latrines. Unless you plan on making them dig their latrines themselves, in which case, probably don't make them roll for it because that sounds awful.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great example of something that if you are going to have it, that is you have to have money sinks, is what you effectively need to have. Because if the players don't have anything to spend it on, then, I mean, go back to our rewards episode. It becomes a useless reward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and any reward that has no value shouldn't be involved. You shouldn't include it in your game. It's like the Chekhov's gun of role playing is, don't include things that don't have a purpose.
Don't show it to the players if they aren't going to use it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Don't give your players a gun if there are no bullets in your universe. That's just mean.
So yeah, that's again, I completely agree with you. It does, some of the other things that you pointed out was, it does speed up the game. It makes, and again, we talked about making the game more fun. When you start to ignore some roles, when you start to ignore some money, it speeds up interactions within the game. I need to get a horse. Okay, your troop has the requisite resources. I need to get 20,000 horses. No, you guys can't do that. You can't. You barter for a pony. Okay.
I mean, you could make it a thing. You're like, okay, well, there's no way you've got enough money for 20,000 horses, but you know who does. And then it becomes its own adventure, and that's its own thing.
You could create something fun out of it, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah. And that's, at this point, money factors into it not at all, and now it's its own separate thing. So anytime you've got a situation where you have to take a look at the resources and what resources the players have, take a look at it and think about, okay, but if we didn't have those, how would they get around this? And you'll usually find that constraining the players, removing the resource constraint, will make a more interesting story. And if you can find that place, do that instead. Make it more fun.
I agree with that. I know you were going to talk about some alternatives to using math in terms of other games and whatnot. But even in like, D&D, or name your game that isn't one of these, The alternative resource is you do quests. A quest achieves the requisite resource that you need to do this. So I'm going to go on a little tangent here. I'm playing a game that just came out called Chained Echoes. Okay, and it's a throwback to old JRPGs of the past. One of the things that they forwent in the entire game is that there is no traditional XP leveling system. Okay. And so instead, you just gain levels as you defeat bosses, or you gain these points that help you as you defeat bosses. And there's a couple other ways to attain them in the game, so you can sort of become a little bit more powerful than the current situation. So it's gear in that. It is a very interesting thing. It is a way to say, well, you don't need to grind all these fights, to become powerful. So you can skip a lot of the unnecessary stuff that you typically have to do in a lot of other like RPGs and things. So that's an example of this is how you get around this, which would be if you don't have money in your universe, or you aren't accounting for money, in order to make money, you must do these number of favors, or you must do a favor for this person or somebody worthwhile to be able to achieve the resource or the resource gap that you technically have.
Aaron, I came into this topic, and the first thing that I thought of when we were talking about this was games that don't have math. And so I was looking up other games, trying to find things that would be interesting. And now you tell me about this Chained Echoes, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I might need to pick it up. But anyway.
It's good. It's good. I've been able to play a little bit of it even with the baby, so it's good.
Excellent. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, it looks fun. But yeah, no, I was looking at games that don't use math at all. Specifically, I was looking for places where either there's no dice or there's no numbers that are more storytelling based. And while that's not really what we were originally talking about, one of the things that I found very useful, I've mentioned it before, I am a huge thief. I will steal from anywhere and use those ideas in other places. And I think that some of the fun can be had in looking at games that don't use math as a way to see how to remove some of that math from your game. And I found 3 specific things I wanted to talk about when it comes to this. They are card games, Jenga games, and theater of the mind. But we've touched a little on theater of the mind already. I'll swing back. Card games, I think we all know, we've played cards before. We've played collectible card games like Magic, or for the life of me, I can't remember, like Pokemon or something like that. They've got card games where you've got a deck of cards with varying abilities and you can use them. There's one of the ones I was looking at is a game called Phoenix Dawn Command that has a couple hundred cards that you assemble into decks for your players and use them as your resources to play through. So instead of managing resources as numbers on a sheet, you're actually holding them. You got them in your hand. You don't have to worry about how many of them you've got. You have to look and see what's available and play them. And I think that's a real interesting way to go about it. You could put that into tabletop RPG where you've got I've seen that done with spells where you've got instead of assembling, your spell book and you've got X number of spell points, you have the spells in your hand and you can just throw them down and those are your spells for the day. And that's fun.
That's actually an interesting thing. It sort of sounds a lot like I could see doing a fun like twist where you sort of do it a la like a deck builder. Mm-hmm. And so like your entire repertoire is based upon that. There's a lot of randomness involved in that, but then sword dice. So what?
Well, and I've heard I've listened to some other DMs talk about how they fix some problems with their systems. And one of the things I heard was talking about inspiration or bardic inspiration or, giving your players bonuses for doing things. And if people don't use them right away, they forget they have them.
Well, that's why the physical component makes a lot of sense because you always have it in front of you. Although
Yeah,
people tend to also forget about those things too.
that's why you gotta like make them like part of the event.
Yeah.
It's not just like you throw down the cards and that sort of
Or people
removes.
become very resource hoarding in that
Mhm.
regard, which is like the cards are so physical, this cards go so powerful that I can't use them. But that's a whole different subject, right?
Yeah. Well, and you could have yeah, you could work with it, but
Yeah.
like it's an idea. Uh, I had mentioned earlier uh, cards, and then the second was Jenga.
This was interesting because I've heard about this from some other podcasters that we've done collaborations with, and they talked about it at a con game. This was run, or maybe I heard it on another podcast, but I didn't know the name of the game. This might be the one of these two might be the game, but
Yeah.
the idea is that like, and I'm pretty sure Dread is the game here, which is it's a horror based game, and when you have to do something dangerous, you're pulling a tile, and when you die, it fails. But I've also heard of one. It must be a little bit different, where you pull. The GM tells you how many tiles you need to pull to execute the thing, and then
Yeah. Well, I mean, it could still be this.
yeah.
I haven't played it yet. But in looking up these games, once again, I have added another game to the list of things that I need to play, which is just par for my course here, is that I can't get through one of these episodes without finding more stuff to do. Um, yes, Dread was the first game that I came across, and I think that's really fun. Is that instead of numbers or anything like that, you've got a physical representation of the danger you're in. Every time you do something dangerous, you make your situation, your tower of wooden blocks, more precarious. And how far are you willing to stretch it to get through this story? How good are you at surviving? Is an actual aspect of the story, and I find that interesting. I thought that was a really cool way to do that. The other Jenga game I had found was nothing like this at all. It's a game called Star-Crossed. And Star-Crossed is a romantic two-player game where each player comes up with a character that is different than the other one. And they are now star-crossed lovers. And they have to have the romantic entanglements. And when you do something that's romantic, or you connect with the other player's character, not the other player. I mean, you get connect with the other player. That's cool. You have to remove one of the bricks. And if you do it successfully, you get a point, and you build up the points in your sheet. And then when the tower eventually falls, because it will, you take a look at the points that you have and the points that they have, and that sort of builds the ending to the story. Either you two, survive and make it work in this wild and crazy world, or those two star-crossed lovers just were not meant to be. And
If someone does find a significant other by playing Starcrossed, please write into the podcast, levelforgamingpodcast@gmail.com. That'd be wonderful.
that's great. I love it. And I thought that also is a very interesting idea. Is that you're building something together, and because it is this dangerous aspect of these two characters that shouldn't be together, but yearn. That the tower itself, it's all it's an interesting concept. Um, I don't know. I don't know where I would be able to play that.
We'll take it home here on this last piece here. So this is the complete theater of the mind, and we've talked about theater of the mind in the past, but the first one that you had written down here was just a cooperative storytelling, which is this is like the ultimate just say yes, which is like, if you believe it works, then you say yes, and if not, you say no.
Yeah. When you do a story like this, I've done this before. I've done storytelling this way. I found it's easiest if it's one-on-one, and you put some constraints on it. The easiest way to do it is like if you're doing a horror or a fantasy game, it's the person who you're telling the story to, they can do what they can do. You maintain within the real world, um, and real basics. And you can tie in other stories from other people and have different sessions, but one-on-one works best. When you get a group, it becomes difficult unless you go around the group round robin style. Um, but it's fun and you can do a lot with it. And we've already talked about utilizing some of those things in your game, getting rid of roles, because if you come up with a good solution, you come up with something that the character can do, then
it's less offensive to the rest of the group if a one-on-one game figures out the puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one that you had here was I've never heard of this one, but Wander Home. I guess you just showed. I just looked it up before the podcast started, and I guess it's kind of an adventure journey where you earn tokens, and then the tokens are used to overcome obstacles.
And once again, with any of these, it's know your player. These are less combat oriented games. These are more
it's a more whimsical kind of story. I mean, especially Wander Home, it looks like it's more of a family oriented game. So very, very, very unique from that perspective.
Yeah. And I think that the tokens idea is very interesting in that we talked about, giving cards out when players get inspiration, when like maybe you just give them tokens. And if they want to, you can throw down a couple of tokens to add to a roll later on in the game because they did a good job early on. And you can use that sort of thing. And it saves having to worry about failures or just overcoming something. So these are all possibilities and ways you can get rid of math without getting rid of math.
Well, there we go. You have anything else you want to add to this, Josh?
No, I think we're good here.
All right. Well, if you've thought of some interesting ways to get rid of math, or if you thought of ways that math must be integral to your game, let me know. Level Up Your Gaming Podcast at gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. Also, the podcast is on YouTube. I've gotten lazy again. I'm sorry for the last 2 episodes. And go ahead and smash the like button there. I swear, more likes, more likely I'll load it up to YouTube more frequently. Also, rate, subscribe, review, all those other good things. And that'll wrap us up for the week. So for Josh, I'm Aaron. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye.